So, what I want to talk about today is what a typical trajectory of brain development looks like. Because when we know what a typical brain development looks like, that can better help us better understand, help you as a parent, as a provider, as a caregiver, educator, to be able to understand and um, visualize when maybe a kiddo is not on this ideal or this typical trajectory of brain development. Because when we notice these things, these are windows into the brain and help us give an understanding of where they're at in development. Are they on this typical trajectory of brain development, or are we starting to see these gaps start to occur in brain development, which then may be leading to some of these behavioral learning and socialization challenges that we see so many kids struggle with? So when we better understand brain development, we can better understand behaviors and really be able to understand where we need to go and what we can do. So, when we look at typical brain development, first we know that babies are not born with fully developed brains. We know that they live in their brainstem. And that's where we get this IMR, which is infantile movement reflexes or primitive reflexes. Some of you may have never heard, or most of you may never heard of primitive reflexes. And that's okay. A lot of what I may talk about may be new. So stay with me here. So we know that babies are born with not fully developed brains. We know that the way that they primarily process their world when they're first born and within kind of that first year is through primitive reflexes. These are kind of that rooting reflex. So when you do that on a baby, or you put your finger in a baby's hand, it grasps, or when you clap, baby jumps back like that. Those are some of the primitive reflexes. There's a lot more primitive reflexes, but that's how they process their world and move about their world. Because, I mean, it's not a very efficient way, but it's what they have because they don't have fully developed brains yet. But by a age of 1, those primitive reflexes should all be integrated in the brain, meaning that higher areas of the brain should have taken over, and none of those primitive reflexes should be present anymore. Meaning that when we test for them, we shouldn't get any signs that they're still there. Then what happens is around that 1, what becomes their primary, not their only way, but their primary way of processing and navigating their world is through movement touch. So movement touch. We start with gross motor, then we move to fine motor, and then we move to ocular motor. So moving from bigger to smaller muscles. That's their primary way of moving through development. And then we start to hit about that 2 to 3, and they start to process their world more through auditory verbal. So this is where then we start to notice that, those little like sounds that they're making, they have a purpose. They start to process their world more through receptive language, so that the language of, when you're communicating to somebody, they're understanding you. That's receptive language. Then after receptive, we start to see expressive language. That's verbalization from them. Okay, so we start to see that occur. Now, with auditory verbal, or once we get past that auditory verbal, we start to hit around 4 years of age. And it's not exactly, but give or take around that age of 4, the brain starts to then primarily process its world through visual cognition, that mind's eye, that whole brain functioning, that cortex. This is that ability to really understand that, hey, like when we do this, this could be the ramification of that. To be able to visualize the past more than just like what happened a few hours ago, what happened a couple months ago, those type of things. We start to be more efficient in the way that we process our world. This is our gift as humans, is visual cognition. This isn't visual acuity like you might think, but it's visual cognition, that whole brain functioning. Now, so again, we don't have fully developed brains when we're born. We move through this trajectory of brain development, and we start with primitive reflexes, then we primarily move to movement, touch, then auditory, verbal, and then visual cognition. So not that when we are primarily, in one of these areas, are we not processing our world through anything else. It's just that when we are in a certain area, say movement, touch, that is our primary way. Okay? Not our only way, just our primary way. So these are things that we need to know. And when we look at that, are kids hitting this trajectory of brain development, or are they maybe just not there yet? These are things that we need to know, because when we look at behaviors are a window into the brain. Okay? There's always a reason for behaviors. There are no purposeless behaviors. So when we better understand a normal trajectory of brain development, we can better be able to, look and notice those, maybe starting to see these gaps in brain development. So I hope this helped. If you have any questions on brain development, please post in the comments section. We are here to help you help your families live their best expression of life.